The stagecoach rattled like a dying man's last breath. Eliza Harrow pressed her gloved hand against the cracked leather seat, trying to keep her spine straight as the wheels slammed through another rut. Across from her, a cattle rancher with tobacco-stained teeth dozed with his hat pulled low. Next to him, a preacher's wife clutched a Bible so tight her knuckles had gone white an hour ago. The air inside reeked of sweat, dust, and something sour that Eliza couldn't name and didn't want to. She turned her face to the window, watching the landscape blur into endless brown. No trees, no green, just rock and scrub and heat that made the horizon shimmer like a liar's promise. 3 weeks ago, she'd had a parlor with velvet curtains, a wardrobe full of dresses that didn't smell like someone else's desperation, invitations to balls where men with soft hands asked her to dance. Now she had a single trunk, a letter she'd read so many times the creases had started to tear, and a ticket west that felt more like a death sentence than a fresh start. Her father's lawyer had been blunt. "He left you nothing but debts, Miss Harrow. The house is gone. The accounts? Empty. You have 2 choices. Throw yourself on the mercy of distant relatives who've already made it clear they want nothing to do with scandal, or accept the arrangement your father made before he died." What arrangement? The lawyer had slid a document across his desk like he was serving her a plate of spoiled meat. A marriage contract, signed and notarized, to a man named Cole Maddox out in the Dakota Territory. "I've never heard that name in my life." Your father owed him a considerable sum. This was the settlement. Eliza had stared at the paper, at her father's signature looping across the bottom in ink that had faded to rust. "My father sold me." "Your father made provisions for your future." "Those aren't the same thing." The lawyer had shrugged, already reaching for the next file on his desk. The meeting was over. Her old life was over. And she'd been fool enough to think the West might be better than begging on the steps of some aunt's estate, swallowing her pride 3 times a day with watered-down soup. The stagecoach lurched again, harder this time. The preacher's wife let out a small cry. The rancher jerked awake, his hand going automatically to his hip where a gun probably sat. Then Eliza heard it. The sound that didn't belong. Hoofbeats. Too many, too fast, coming up from behind. "Driver!" the rancher shouted, lurching to the window. "We got company!" The crack of a rifle split the air. The stage jerked sideways as the horses screamed and bolted. Eliza grabbed for the hanging strap, but her fingers slipped and she slammed into the side wall, her shoulder exploding with pain. The preacher's wife was screaming now, a high, thin sound that cut through everything. The rancher had his pistol out, trying to brace himself against the wild rocking of the coach. Another shot. Closer. The window next to Eliza's head shattered, spraying glass across her lap. She threw her arms over her face, felt something hot slice across her forearm. Blood welled up, shockingly red against her gray sleeve. "Get down!" the rancher roared, but there was nowhere to go. The coach was a coffin on wheels, bucking and spinning as the driver screamed and the horses ran blind. Then the world turned sideways. The impact drove the air from Eliza's lungs. She was weightless for a heartbeat, flying, and then she hit something hard, and everything went bright and sharp and wrong. The coach was rolling. She knew that much. Rolling and breaking apart, wood splintering, metal shrieking, the preacher's wife's screams cutting off mid-breath. When it stopped, Eliza was on her back, staring up at a sky so blue it hurt. Her ears rang. Her mouth tasted like copper. Somewhere nearby, a horse was making a sound no animal should make. She tried to sit up. Her body didn't want to cooperate. Everything felt distant and muffled, like she was underwater. Voices, men's voices, rough and laughing, boots crunching on broken wood. "Check the bodies. Anything worth taking?" "Driver's dead. Looks like his neck snapped." "What about inside?" Eliza's vision swam. She turned her head. Too fast, the world spun, and saw the wreckage of the stagecoach 15 feet away. One wheel was still turning. The rancher lay half buried under the collapsed roof, not moving. The preacher's wife was gone. Just gone, like she'd never existed. A shadow fell across Eliza's face. She looked up into pale eyes set in a face burned dark by sun and wind. The man wore a bandana pulled up over his nose. He stared down at her for a long moment, then turned his head and spat. "Got a live one here." "Pretty?" "Hard to tell under all that blood." Hands grabbed her arms, hauled her upright. Eliza's legs wouldn't hold. She sagged between two men who smelled like whiskey and old leather. Her head lolled forward. She watched her own blood drip onto the dust, making dark spots that vanished almost instantly in the thirsty earth. Check her bags. They dropped her. She hit the ground and stayed there, cheek pressed to dirt that was still warm from the afternoon sun. Somewhere behind her they were tearing through the wreckage, laughing when they found something good, cursing when they didn't. She should move, should run, should do something besides lie here like a slaughtered animal. But her body had given up. Her mind was following. The gunshot, when it came, sounded like the world cracking open. Eliza flinched, waiting for the pain, but it didn't come. Instead, the voices around her changed, went from lazy and pleased to sharp and urgent. "Ryder! Just one? Coming in fast." More gunfire. A lot of it, all at once, deafening. Eliza pressed her hands over her ears and curled into herself, making her body as small as possible. The shooting went on, punctuated by shouts and the scream of horses. Then abruptly, it stopped. The silence after was worse. Eliza didn't move, didn't breathe. She waited for hands to grab her again, for a bullet to find her, for whatever came next in a world that had proven itself to be nothing but cruel. Boots approached. Slower this time. Deliberate. They stopped next to her head. "You hit?" A man's voice, low and rough, with an accent that wasn't quite southern, but wasn't northern either. Eliza didn't answer. Couldn't. "Lady, I asked you a question." She managed to crack one eye open. All she could see were boots, scuffed leather, worn heels, dust caked so thick it had turned them gray. Above that, dark trousers, a gun belt with a star pinned to it, dull in the fading light. Her voice came out as a croak. "I don't know." The man crouched down, bringing his face into view. He was maybe 35, maybe 50. The frontier aged people in ways that made numbers meaningless. His face was all hard angles and sun damage, with a scar cutting through one eyebrow and eyes the color of winter sky. He studied her with the same detached interest a butcher might show a side of beef. "You're bleeding," he said. Not a question. The window broke. "Can you stand?" "I don't know." He stood, looked around at the carnage, then back down at her. His jaw worked like he was chewing something over. "The men who did this are dead. All 4 of them. You're safe now, relatively speaking. The others, dead. You're the only one who made it." The words hit her like stones. The rancher, the preacher's wife, the driver whose name she'd never learned. All dead, and she was alive. And there was no reason for it except dumb luck. The lawman was still watching her. "I'm going to ask you some questions. You think you can manage that?" Eliza pushed herself up on her elbows. The world tilted but held. "Yes." "Name?" "Eliza Harrow." "Where were you headed?" "A town called Forge Creek, I think." That's what the ticket said. Something shifted in the man's expression. Not quite surprise, more like recognition. "Forge Creek. Do you know it?" He didn't answer. Instead, he straightened and looked west, toward a horizon that was starting to turn orange. "We need to move. Sun will be down in 2 hours, and there's worse things than road agents out here after dark." "I can't. My trunk is probably scattered across half a mile of prairie. What you're wearing is what you've got now." He held out a hand. "Come on." Eliza stared at that hand. It was broad and scarred, with calluses that spoke of hard use. A working hand. Not like the soft, manicured hands of the men she'd danced with in Boston. She took it. He pulled her up with no effort at all, steadying her when she swayed. Up close, he was taller than she'd thought. Solid. The kind of solid that came from manual labor and violence in equal measure. "Can you ride?" "Yes, I used to." "Good enough." He guided her toward a horse standing 20 yards off, a big roan gelding that watched them approach with obvious skepticism. "Name's Cole Maddox, by the way. I'm the law in Forge Creek and about 100 miles in any direction that matters." The name hit her like a fist to the stomach. She stopped walking. "What did you say?" He glanced back at her. "Cole Maddox, why?" Eliza's mouth had gone dry. "I was coming to Forge Creek to... There was supposed to be..." Understanding dawned in his eyes. He looked her up and down again, and this time his expression was different, harder. "You're Thomas Harrow's daughter." It wasn't a question. "You knew my father?" "I knew his debts." Cole turned away, checking the saddle cinch with sharp, angry movements. "And I knew the arrangement he made to settle them." The world seemed to contract around her. "You're the man I'm supposed to marry." "Was supposed to marry? Your father's been dead 3 months. The contract died with him, far as I'm concerned." "But the lawyer said—" "I don't care what some Boston lawyer said." Cole swung up into the saddle, then looked down at her with an expression she couldn't read. "Your father was a gambling man with more ambition than sense. He got himself in deep with some people who don't take kindly to unpaid debts. I bought his markers to keep those people from doing worse than just taking his money. The marriage was his idea, said it would give you protection, a new life. I went along because—" He stopped, shook his head. "Doesn't matter now. Point is, you're free of it. Soon as we get to town, I'll put you on the next stage east." Eliza stood there in the dust and blood, staring up at the stranger who was supposed to have been her husband. The man her father had traded her to like livestock, and he was letting her go, just like that. She should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt something closer to panic. "I can't go back east." "Why not?" "Because there's nothing there. No family that wants me, no money, no prospects. I came west because it was the only option I had left." Cole's expression didn't change. "That's not my problem." "No," Eliza said, and she was surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "But you made a deal with my father. A contract. A contract that's not worth the paper it was written on now that he's dead." "Maybe, but I'm here. And you went to the trouble of saving my life just now, so I figure you're not the type to leave a woman stranded in the middle of nowhere with nothing." He stared at her for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he almost smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "You're more like your father than you know." "Is that an insult?" "It's an observation." He held out his hand again. "Get on the horse, Miss Harrow. We'll sort the rest out in town." Eliza took his hand and let him pull her up behind the saddle. She had to wrap her arms around his waist to keep from sliding off. He was solid as oak, and he smelled like gun smoke and leather and sweat. As they started moving, she looked back at the wreckage of the stagecoach, at the bodies already starting to draw flies, at the life she'd known, broken and scattered like everything else her father had touched. Then she turned forward and watched the sun sink toward a horizon that seemed to stretch on forever. Forge Creek wasn't much of a town. Main Street was a rutted dirt track lined with false front buildings that looked like they'd been thrown up in a hurry and maintained with even less care. A saloon, a general store, a building with assay office painted on the window in letters that were already starting to flake. Maybe 24 structures total, squatting under the enormous sky like they were embarrassed to be there. They rode in after dark. The temperature had dropped 30 degrees and Eliza was shivering despite the heat that still radiated up from the horse's body. Her arms ached from holding on. Her head throbbed. The cut on her forearm had stopped bleeding but felt hot and tight. Cole pulled up in front of a small building set slightly apart from the others. Light showed through the cracks around the door. "This is my place," he said, dismounting. "You can stay here tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out your situation." Eliza slid off the horse with considerably less grace. Her legs nearly buckled when they hit solid ground. Cole caught her elbow, steadied her, then let go like she'd burned him. He pushed open the door. The interior was exactly what she'd expected. Spare, functional, clean in the way of spaces inhabited by men who had no patience for clutter. A table with 2 chairs. A stove. A narrow bed in the corner. Shelves holding supplies and ammunition in equal measure. A gun rack with 3 rifles. Everything organized with military precision. "Sit," Cole said, pointing to one of the chairs. Eliza sat. She watched as he lit a lamp, filled a basin with water from a pitcher, and pulled out a box that proved to be a medical kit of sorts. He brought it all to the table and started rolling up his sleeves. "Let me see your arm." She peeled back the torn, bloody fabric of her sleeve. The cut was long, but not deep, already crusting over. Cole cleaned it with brisk efficiency, his touch impersonal and firm. When he was done, he wrapped it with a strip of clean cloth and tied it off. "You get thrown clear when the coach rolled?" "I think so. It's all blurry." "You're lucky. I've seen stage wrecks before. Most people don't walk away. I don't feel lucky. He almost smiled again. You wouldn't. Cole moved to the stove and started building a fire. Within minutes, he had coffee brewing and beans heating in a pan. The domesticity of it was jarring, this hard man with his guns and his scars, cooking like it was something he did every day. Which it probably was. Why did you save me? Eliza asked suddenly. He didn't look up from the stove. Part of the job. You didn't know who I was when you started shooting. Didn't need to. Those men were road agents. They'd have killed you whether I showed up or not. He glanced over his shoulder. Or worse. Eliza understood what he meant by worse. She'd heard the stories, even back east, about what happened to women who fell into the wrong hands out here. Thank you, she said quietly. Cole shrugged. Like I said, part of the job. He brought her coffee and a plate of beans. The beans were over-salted and the coffee was strong enough to strip paint, but Eliza ate every bite. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until food was in front of her. Cole ate standing up, leaning against the wall, watching her with that same assessing look. Tell me about the contract, Eliza said when she'd finished. What's there to tell? Your father owed money to the wrong people. I bought the debt. He offered you as collateral. And you agreed. I did. Why? Cole set down his plate. Because out here, a man's word matters. Your father gave his word that you'd honor the arrangement. I gave mine that I'd keep you safe. Now he's dead and you're here and the whole thing's a mess. It doesn't have to be. He looked at her sharply. What's that supposed to mean? Eliza set down her own plate and met his eyes. I meant what I said earlier. I have nothing to go back to. No money, no family, no prospects. You made a deal for a wife. I'm offering to honor that deal. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. Cole pushed off from the wall and started pacing. 3 steps one way, 3 steps back, like a caged animal. You don't know what you're talking about. This isn't Boston. This is frontier country. It's hard, and it's mean, and it'll kill you if you're not careful. A woman like me what? Eliza stood up, and she was angry now, properly angry for the first time since the stage wreck. A woman like me can't survive? Can't adapt? Can't learn? That's not what I... Yes, it is. You took one look at me and decided I was too soft, too refined, too useless to make it out here. Well, maybe you're right. Maybe I will fail. But at least let me try. She crossed her arms, ignoring the pull on her injured forearm. Unless you're planning to drag me onto the next stage east by force, I'm staying, with or without your permission. Cole stared at her. In the lamplight, his eyes looked almost gray. You're insane. Probably, but I'm also desperate. And desperate people don't have the luxury of being careful. He turned away, ran a hand through his hair. It was longer than was fashionable, curling at the collar. This is a bad idea. Most of my ideas are. I'm not an easy man to live with. I didn't expect you to be. And I won't pretend to love you. That's not what this would be. Good, Eliza said, because I won't pretend either. Cole looked at her for a long moment. Then he walked to the shelf, pulled down a bottle of whiskey, and poured himself 2 fingers. He drank it in one swallow. If we do this, he said finally, we do it my way. This is my territory, my town, my rules. You don't like how I run things, that's too bad. You want to leave later, I won't stop you. But while you're under my roof, you pull your weight. No dead weight, no complainers. Understood? Eliza lifted her chin. Understood. And another thing, don't expect me to be a husband in any way that matters. I need a woman who can keep house, maybe help out around town when needed. That's it. Nothing more. Fine. I'm serious about this. So am I. They stared at each other across the small room. Eliza could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the weight of the choice she was making settling onto her shoulders like a physical thing. Cole poured another drink. We'll do it proper, at least. There's a minister who comes through once a month. Should be here in a week or so. A week? Unless you want to back out now. I don't. Then I guess we're getting married. He raised his glass in a mock toast. To bad decisions and worse timing. Eliza didn't have a glass to raise. She nodded anyway. Cole drank, set down the glass, and pointed to the bed. You can take that tonight. I'll sleep outside. This is your home. I said you can take the bed. Don't argue. Eliza bit back whatever she'd been about to say. This man had saved her life, fed her, agreed to marry her even though he clearly thought it was a mistake. The least she could do was not fight him over sleeping arrangements. "Thank you," she said instead. Cole grabbed a blanket from the shelf and headed for the door. He paused with his hand on the latch. "Get some rest. Tomorrow I'll introduce you to the town. Fair warning, they're not going to be welcoming." "Why not?" "Because you're a stranger, you're from back east, and you're about to marry the only law in 100 miles. That makes you either a threat or a weakness, depending on who's looking." "Which one do you think I am?" Cole opened the door. Cool night air spilled in, carrying the smell of dust and horse. "Ask me again in a month." Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click. Eliza stood alone in the small room, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the frontier settling in for the night. Somewhere, a dog barked. Somewhere else, a woman laughed. The wind rattled something loose on the roof. She walked to the bed and sat down on the edge. The mattress was thin but clean. No blood on the sheets, unlike her dress. No glass in her hair, unlike an hour ago. She was alive. She was getting married to a stranger. She had chosen this. Eliza lay down fully clothed and stared at the ceiling. The lamp cast shadows that jumped and swayed, making the room feel smaller than it was. Outside, she could hear Cole moving around, settling in somewhere. This was her life now. This room. This town. This hard man who'd pulled her from a wreck and offered her survival instead of love. She should have been terrified. Maybe she was. It was hard to tell anymore. Terror and exhaustion felt about the same. Eliza closed her eyes. Tomorrow she would meet the town. Tomorrow she would start learning how to survive in this place. Tomorrow she would begin the process of becoming whoever she needed to be to make this work. But tonight, she would sleep, and she would not dream of Boston, or her father, or the bodies bleeding out in the dust. She would not dream at all, if she was lucky. The lamp burned low. The wind kept rattling. Somewhere in the darkness, Cole Maddox stood watch over a town that barely knew his name, and a woman who was about to become his wife for all the wrong reasons. And in the morning, everything would change. Again. Eliza woke to the sound of someone chopping wood. The rhythm was steady, mechanical. Thunk, pause, thunk, pause. Each strike precise enough that she could have set a clock by it. Morning light leaked through the gaps in the shutters, harsh and unforgiving. Her body ached in places she hadn't known could ache. The cut on her arm throbbed. She pushed herself upright and immediately regretted it. Her head swam, her stomach lurched, and for a moment she thought she might be sick right there on Cole Maddox's floor. She pressed her palms against her eyes and breathed through her nose until the nausea passed. The chopping stopped. A minute later, the door opened and Cole stepped inside, carrying an armload of split wood. He glanced at her, nodded once, and went about stacking the wood next to the stove without a word. His shirt was damp with sweat despite the morning chill. "There's water in the basin," he said, not looking at her. "Outhouse is around back. When you're ready, come to the general store. It's the building with the green paint. Well, mostly green, parts of it anyway." "What time is it?" "Past 7. Eliza had slept later than she'd intended. Back in Boston, she'd have been up at dawn, getting dressed with her maid's help, planning the day's social calls. Here, 7 o'clock felt like she'd wasted half the morning. "I'll be quick," she said. Cole straightened, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Take your time. Town's not going anywhere." He paused at the door. "You still set on this? The marriage?" "Yes. Even after a night to think it over? Especially after a night to think it over." He studied her face like he was looking for cracks. Whatever he saw, or didn't see, made him shake his head. "Your funeral." Then he was gone again, the door clicking shut behind him. Eliza used the water to wash her face and hands, scrubbing away the dried blood and grime as best she could. Her dress was ruined, torn, stained, hopeless. It was the only one she had. Everything else had been in her trunk, scattered across the prairie by men who were now dead. She looked down at herself. The fabric was good quality, or had been. Dark gray wool that had cost more than most people in this town probably earned in a month. Now it hung on her like a shroud, mocking her with what it used to represent. Nothing to be done about it. She smoothed it down as best she could and went outside. The outhouse was exactly where Cole had said it would be. Eliza used it quickly, trying not to breathe through her nose. When she emerged, she took a moment to look around. Forge Creek in daylight was even less impressive than it had been in the dark. The buildings looked tired and mean, like they resented having to stand upright. The street was empty except for a skinny dog nosing through garbage and a man sleeping it off in front of the saloon. In the distance, she could see a few scattered homesteads, smoke rising from their chimneys in thin gray threads. The sky overhead was enormous and blue and completely indifferent. Eliza started walking toward the general store. Her boots kicked up small clouds of dust with each step. The dog watched her pass, decided she wasn't worth the effort, and went back to its garbage. The general store's green paint had faded to something closer to gray-green, peeling in long strips that curled back from the wood like dead skin. A sign over the door read Tucker's Mercantile in letters that had been precise once but were chipped and faded now. Eliza pushed through the door. The interior smelled like coffee and leather and something sweet she couldn't identify. Shelves lined the walls, packed with everything from canned goods to ammunition to bolts of fabric. A counter ran along the back, and behind it stood a woman who had to be 60 if she was a day, with steel gray hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. The woman's eyes locked onto Eliza the moment she walked in. "So you're the one," she said. Not a question. Eliza stopped. "I'm sorry?" The Boston girl, Cole's mail-order bride. The woman's mouth twisted like she'd bitten into something sour. "Whole town's been talking about nothing else since he rode in with you last night. I'm not a mail-order bride." "No? What would you call it then?" "It's complicated." "I'll bet it is." The woman came around the counter, moving with the stiff gait of someone whose joints didn't work quite right anymore. She looked Eliza up and down with the cold assessment of a livestock buyer. "Name's Agnes Tucker. I run this place. Have for 23 years, since my husband put a bullet in his own head and left me with 3 kids in more debt than sense." Eliza blinked. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Don't be. Harold was a fool and a drunk. I'm better off." Agnes crossed her arms. "You know how to work?" "I can learn." "That's not what I asked." Eliza felt heat rising in her cheeks. "I can read, write, keep accounts. I can sew, embroider, play the piano." Agnes snorted. "Piano, that'll come in real handy when you're trying to slaughter a chicken or haul water from the well." She shook her head. "You're useless." "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Useless. Soft hands, soft voice, soft everything. You'll last maybe 2 weeks before you're crying to Cole about how hard it all is and begging him to put you on the stage back east." The words hit like slaps. Eliza's hands curled into fists at her sides. "You don't know anything about me. I know your type. I've seen it before. City girls who come out here thinking the West is going to be some grand adventure, then break down the first time they have to scrub their own floors or cook their own meals." Agnes leaned against the counter. "Cole Maddox is a hard man in a hard place. He doesn't need some delicate flower who's going to wilt the first time things get rough. Then it's fortunate I'm not a delicate flower. We'll see about that." The door opened behind Eliza. She turned to see Cole walking in, his expression unreadable. "Agnes," he said by way of greeting. "Cole." Agnes's tone softened fractionally. "I was just getting acquainted with your intended." "I heard." He looked at Eliza. "You all right?" "Fine," Eliza said, even though she wasn't. Her face felt hot, and her throat was tight, and she wanted to throw something at Agnes Tucker's smug face. Cole's eyes flicked between them. "Miss Harrow needs clothes. The stage wreck destroyed everything she had. Can you help her or not?" Agnes considered this. "I've got some ready-made dresses in the back. Nothing fancy, but they'll do for everyday wear, assuming she can pay." "Put it on my account." "Your account's already running pretty high, Cole." "Then run it higher." Agnes sighed, but nodded. "Fine. Come on then, girl. Let's see what we can find." She disappeared into the back room. Cole touched Eliza's elbow, stopping her before she could follow. "Don't let Agnes get to you," he said quietly. "She's hard on everyone. It's not personal." It felt personal. "That's just how she is. Out here, people say what they think. You'll get used to it." "And if I don't?" Cole's expression didn't change. "Then you'll have a rough time of it." He let her go and moved to the counter, pulling out a piece of paper and starting to write something. Eliza watched him for a moment, the way he held the pencil like it might try to escape, the way his brow furrowed in concentration, then turned and walked into the back room. Agnes was pulling dresses off a shelf, holding them up to the light, and shaking her head. "Most of these are too big. You're built like a fence post." She tossed aside a blue calico, then a brown wool. Finally, she pulled out 2 dresses, one dark green, one gray, and thrust them at Eliza. "Try these." "Here? Where else? I'm not running a fancy boutique. There's a screen in the corner if you're shy." Eliza took the dresses and moved behind the screen. She struggled out of her ruined gray dress, every movement making her injured arm throb. The green dress went on first. It was plain cotton, practical, with long sleeves and a high neck. The fit was loose in some places, tight in others, but it was clean and whole, and that was enough. "This one fits," she called out. "Good. Take the gray one, too. You'll need a spare. And you'll want a work dress. Something you don't mind getting dirty. There should be a brown one somewhere." Agnes kept talking, listing off items Eliza would need: a coat for winter, boots that could handle mud, an apron, gloves. The list went on, each item a reminder of how unprepared Eliza was for this life. When she emerged from behind the screen, Agnes was wrapping everything in brown paper and tying it with string. "That's quite a lot," Eliza said. "You're going to be Cole Maddox's wife. People will expect you to look the part, even if you can't act it yet." Agnes pushed the packages across the counter. "There's also this." She held out a revolver. Eliza stared at it. "I don't know how to use that." "Then you'd better learn. Cole can teach you, or I can, or you can figure it out yourself when some drunk decides to test whether the lawman's wife is as soft as she looks." Agnes set the gun down with a heavy thunk. "Your choice." Eliza picked it up. It was heavier than she'd expected, cold and brutal in her hand. The metal gleamed dully in the lamplight. "Thank you," she said, though she wasn't sure she meant it. Agnes just grunted. Cole appeared in the doorway. "Ready?" Eliza nodded, tucking the gun awkwardly into the folds of her new dress. Cole took the packages without asking and headed for the door. Eliza followed, feeling Agnes's eyes on her back the whole way out. Outside, the street had filled up slightly. A few people were moving about, a man loading supplies onto a wagon, 2 women talking in low voices outside the saloon, a group of children chasing each other in the dust. They all stopped what they were doing when Cole and Eliza emerged. The stares were heavy and unblinking. "Don't look at them," Cole said under his breath. "Hard not to." "Try anyway." They walked in silence back to Cole's house. Once inside, he set the packages on the table and moved to the stove, starting the process of making coffee with the same mechanical precision he did everything else. "The minister will be here in 5 days," he said without turning around. "I sent word this morning. The ceremony will be quick. No fuss." "Fine. After that, you'll live here. This will be your home too, such as it is." Eliza looked around the spare, functional room. "Where will you sleep?" "I'll build another bed. Put it on the far wall. We'll hang a curtain for privacy." "That's very considerate. It's practical." Cole poured 2 cups of coffee and brought one to her. "We need to talk about expectations." "All right." He sat down across from her, his big hands wrapped around the tin cup. "I'm gone a lot. There's a lot of territory to cover and not many people to cover it. Sometimes I'm gone for days at a time." "What am I supposed to do when you're gone?" "Keep the house. Help out at the store if Agnes needs it. There's a woman named Sarah Brennan who runs a boarding house. She might need help with laundry or cooking. Find a way to make yourself useful." "And when you're here?" "Same thing. I don't expect you to wait on me hand and foot, but I do expect meals cooked and the place kept clean. I'll handle repairs, firewood, anything that requires heavy lifting. Fair?" "Fair." Cole took a long drink of his coffee. "There's one more thing. People are going to talk. About us. About the arrangement. About why a Boston girl would marry a frontier lawman. Let them talk. Don't try to explain it. Don't try to defend it. Just keep your head down and do your work. And if someone asks me directly, tell them it's none of their business." Eliza wrapped her hands around her own cup, feeling the heat seep into her palms. "You really think this is going to work, don't you? This arrangement?" "No," Cole said bluntly. "I think it's a terrible idea, and we're both going to regret it. But you're set on staying, and I'm set on keeping my word, so here we are." "Here we are," Eliza echoed. They drank their coffee in silence. Outside, the town continued its slow morning routine. Horses clopping past, voices calling out. The ring of a hammer on metal from somewhere down the street. Normal sounds of a normal day in a place that was anything but normal to Eliza. Cole stood abruptly. I've got work to do. There's been complaints about rustlers hitting the ranches north of here. I need to ride out, see what I can find. When will you be back? 2 days? Maybe 3? He grabbed his hat from the peg by the door. There's food in the cupboard. If you need anything, ask Agnes. She'll grumble about it, but she'll help. All right. He paused with his hand on the door. And Eliza, stay inside after dark. This town's got a rough element, and they don't all respect the badge the way they should. Then he was gone, leaving her alone in the small house with her packages and her new gun and the crushing weight of the choice she'd made. Eliza spent the rest of the day learning the house. She went through every cupboard, every shelf, cataloging what was there and what was missing. Cole had the basics: flour, salt, coffee, dried beans, a few cans of peaches that looked like they'd been there for years. But there were gaps too. No sugar, no tea, no spices beyond salt and pepper. The cooking pots were functional but battered. The dishes were mismatched. It was a bachelor's kitchen, maintained by someone who viewed food as fuel and nothing more. She could work with that. By evening, she'd made a list of supplies she'd need. She'd also found a broom and swept the floor, washed the dishes, and organized the shelves in a way that made more sense. Small things, but they gave her something to do besides sit and think. When night fell, she lit the lamp and sat at the table with the revolver Agnes had given her. She turned it over in her hands, studying it. The cylinder held 6 rounds. She found the ammunition in one of Cole's cupboards, a whole box of it, brass cartridges lined up like soldiers. She loaded the gun carefully, following instinct and logic, then unloaded it and did it again until the motion felt natural. Then she aimed at the far wall and dry-fired, feeling the trigger pull, the hammer fall. Again. By the time she went to bed, her hand was steady and she could load the gun in under 30 seconds. It wasn't much, but it was something. The next 2 days passed in a strange, suspended way. Eliza fell into a routine: wake early, make coffee, clean, read through the few books Cole had on his shelves, practice with the gun. At midday, she'd walk to the general store and buy what she needed, enduring Agnes's sharp comments and the stares of the townspeople. She learned quickly who mattered in Forge Creek. There was Agnes, of course. There was a man named Dutch, who ran the saloon and seemed to know everyone's business. There was the assayer, a nervous little man named Phelps, who jumped every time someone spoke to him. And there was Sarah Brennan, the boarding house owner, a handsome woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a voice that could cut glass when she wanted it to. Sarah was the first person besides Cole to speak to Eliza with anything approaching warmth. "Don't let them get to you," she said one afternoon, catching Eliza on her way out of the general store. "They're suspicious of outsiders. Always have been. Give it time." "How much time?" Sarah laughed. "A year, maybe 2. Out here, people don't trust quick." "That's not very encouraging." "I know, but it's honest." Sarah tilted her head, studying Eliza. "You're tougher than you look, aren't you?" "I don't know yet." "Well, you'll find out soon enough. This place has a way of showing people what they're made of." She smiled. "Come by the boarding house sometime. I make decent pie, and I could use the company." It was a small kindness, but it meant more than Sarah probably knew. Cole returned on the 3rd day, just before sunset. Eliza heard his horse first, then his boots on the porch. When he walked in, he looked exhausted, dust-covered and hollow-eyed, with a fresh bruise blooming along his jaw. "Did you find them?" Eliza asked. "The rustlers?" "Found them." He dropped his saddlebags on the floor and moved to the basin, splashing water on his face. "They won't be a problem anymore." There was something final in the way he said it. Eliza didn't ask for details. Cole dried his face and looked around the house. His gaze lingered on the organized shelves, the swept floor, the pot of stew simmering on the stove. "You've been busy," he said. "I needed something to do." He nodded slowly. "Smells good." It was the closest thing to a compliment he'd given her. Eliza ladled stew into 2 bowls, and they ate in silence, the way they did everything. When they were done, Cole pushed back from the table. "Minister's coming tomorrow," he said. "Ceremony will be at noon. Dutch is rounding up witnesses." "All right. You still want to do this?" Eliza met his eyes. "Yes. Even though you know it's going to be hard?" especially because I know it's going to be hard. Something shifted in his expression, not quite approval, but close. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. That night, Eliza lay in bed and listened to Cole moving around outside, building the second bed he'd promised. The sound of hammer on nails echoed through the thin walls. It went on for hours, steady and rhythmic, until finally it stopped and she heard him come inside and settle onto the new frame. Tomorrow she would marry a stranger. Tomorrow her old life would end completely. Tomorrow she would become Eliza Maddox, wife of a frontier lawman, resident of a town that didn't want her. She should have been terrified, but lying there in the dark, listening to Cole's breathing even out into sleep, all she felt was a strange, fierce determination. She would make this work. She would prove Agnes wrong, prove the whole town wrong. She would survive. And maybe, if she was lucky, she'd do more than just survive. Maybe she'd actually live. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and cold. Eliza woke before the sun and lay there watching the light creep across the ceiling, trying to calm the nervous flutter in her stomach. This was it. No going back now. She rose and washed carefully, then put on the green dress Agnes had given her. It was still plain, still practical, but it was clean and whole, and that would have to be enough. She braided her hair and pinned it up, studying herself in the small mirror Cole had tacked to the wall. She looked pale, serious. Nothing like the girl who'd left Boston 3 weeks ago. That girl was gone. This was who she was now. Cole was already up, standing outside with his back to the house, looking out at the horizon. He'd changed into a clean shirt and actually shaved. It made him look younger, though not softer. Nothing could make Cole Maddox look soft. "Ready?" he asked when she came outside. "As I'll ever be." They walked to the center of town together. A small crowd had gathered, maybe 20 people, most of them looking like they'd come for the spectacle rather than the celebration. Agnes was there, arms crossed, expression sour. Sarah Brennan stood near the front, offering Eliza an encouraging smile. Dutch leaned against the saloon porch, chewing tobacco and watching with amused interest. The minister was a thin man with watery eyes and a Bible so worn the pages were falling out. He looked at Eliza and Cole like they were a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. "Shall we begin?" he asked. Cole nodded. The ceremony was brief and perfunctory. The minister read from his Bible in a droning voice, stumbling over words and losing his place twice. He asked if Cole took Eliza as his lawfully wedded wife. Cole said, "I do," in a flat voice that suggested he was agreeing to a business arrangement, which he was. Then the minister turned to Eliza. "And do you, Eliza Harrow, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, for better or worse, in sickness and health, till death do you part?" Eliza looked at Cole. He was staring straight ahead, jaw tight, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. She understood the feeling. "I do," she said. "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss the bride." Cole turned to her. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Then he leaned in and pressed a quick, dry kiss to her cheek. It was over in a second, more like a handshake than anything romantic. The crowd clapped politely. Dutch let out a whistle. Agnes looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. And just like that, Eliza Harrow became Eliza Maddox. The town threw together something approximating a celebration at the saloon. There was whiskey and beer and a few plates of food that people had contributed. Eliza stood near the wall, accepting awkward congratulations from people who clearly didn't know what to make of her. Cole stayed for exactly one drink, then disappeared, claiming he had work to do. Eliza didn't blame him. The whole thing felt surreal and uncomfortable, like they were all playing roles in a show nobody wanted to watch. Sarah Brennan was the one who finally rescued her, appearing at her elbow with 2 glasses of something amber. "Drink this," Sarah said. "It'll help." Eliza took a sip and immediately regretted it. The liquid burned all the way down. "What is that?" "Dutch's Special Reserve. It's terrible, but it's effective." Sarah clinked her glass against Eliza's. "Welcome to Forge Creek, Mrs. Maddox." The name sounded wrong, foreign, like it belonged to someone else. "Thank you," Eliza managed. "How are you holding up?" "I'm not sure yet." Sarah laughed. "Honest answer. I like that." She glanced around the room, then lowered her voice. "Listen, I know this isn't a conventional situation. And I know people are going to judge, but for what it's worth, I think you're brave. Crazy maybe, but brave. Crazy seems more accurate. Maybe. But sometimes crazy is what it takes to survive out here. Sarah squeezed her arm. If you need anything, someone to talk to, a place to hide for a few hours, whatever, you come find me. All right? Eliza felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. All right. She stayed at the saloon for another hour, nursing her terrible whiskey and fielding questions from townspeople who were emboldened by alcohol. Most of them wanted to know why she'd come west, why she'd married Cole, what her plans were. She gave vague answers and smiled until her face hurt. When she finally escaped back to the house, the sun was setting and her head was pounding. Cole was inside, sitting at the table with a stack of papers in front of him. He looked up when she entered. "How was it?" he asked. "Awkward. Figured as much." He went back to his papers. "There's food on the stove if you're hungry." Eliza wasn't hungry, but she forced herself to eat anyway. Then she cleaned up the dishes and stood there in the middle of the small house, uncertain what to do next. This was her wedding night, and her husband was sitting 10 feet away doing paperwork, ignoring her completely. "Cole?" she said. He looked up. "Yeah? What happens now?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, we're married. What do we do?" Cole set down his pencil. "We live our lives, same as before, except now there's two of us doing it." He paused. "If you're asking about marital obligations, I already told you that's not what this is about." "I know, I just—" Eliza trailed off, unsure how to articulate what she was feeling. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do." "Neither do I," Cole admitted. "I've never been married before." Despite everything, Eliza almost smiled. "That makes two of us." They looked at each other across the small room. The lamp flickered, casting shadows that jumped across Cole's face. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling something loose. "We'll figure it out," Cole said finally. "It's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be perfect. But we'll figure it out." Eliza nodded. "All right." She went to bed that night as a married woman, lying in the narrow bed while her husband slept 10 feet away behind a curtain. It should have felt wrong, strange, uncomfortable. Instead, it just felt lonely. But loneliness was something Eliza knew how to handle. She'd been lonely in Boston too, surrounded by people who'd turned their backs the moment scandal touched her family. At least here, the loneliness was honest. She closed her eyes and willed herself to sleep. Tomorrow would be another day of proving herself. Another day of surviving. Another day of being Eliza Maddox, whoever that turned out to be. And somehow, some way, she would make it work. She had to. Because there was nowhere else to go. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that was more endurance than life. Eliza woke before dawn, made coffee strong enough to strip rust, and had breakfast on the table before Cole stirred. He'd eat in silence, pull on his hat, and disappear for hours or sometimes days. She'd clean, cook, practice loading the revolver until her fingers moved without thinking, and wait. The town remained cold. Not hostile exactly, but watchful. Like they were all waiting for her to fail. Agnes continued her campaign of small cruelties, overcharging for supplies, making Eliza wait while she served other customers first, dropping casual observations about how city women never lasted more than a season. The other women were worse in their own way. They didn't speak to her at all, just gathered in tight clusters and went silent when she passed. Only Sarah kept her word. Once a week, Eliza would escape to the boarding house, where Sarah would pour tea that was too weak and serve pie that was too sweet, and they'd talk about nothing important. Those hours were the only time Eliza felt like a human being instead of an unwanted curiosity. "Give them time," Sarah would say. "They'll come around." Eliza stopped believing her after the first month. Cole remained a stranger who happened to share her roof. He was unfailingly polite, meticulously fair about dividing chores, and completely unreachable. They spoke in practical sentences about supplies and schedules. They ate meals across from each other in silence. At night, they slept on opposite sides of the room, with a curtain between them like a wall. It was the loneliest Eliza had ever been. But she'd meant what she'd said that first night. She would make this work. She would survive. So she learned. She learned how to cook over a wood stove that heated unevenly and smoked when the wind changed. She learned how to scrub clothes against a washboard until her knuckles were raw and bleeding. She learned which supplies the general store carried and which had to be ordered from 3 towns over. She learned the sound of Cole's footsteps and could tell from the heaviness of his tread whether the day had been good or bad. And she learned to shoot. Cole taught her on a Sunday morning 6 weeks after the wedding. He'd been gone for 4 days tracking down a claim jumper, and when he came back, he found her in the yard behind the house, dry-firing the revolver at an imaginary target. He watched for a moment, then said, "You're pulling to the left." Eliza lowered the gun. "I didn't hear you come back. I noticed." He walked over, took the revolver from her hand, and demonstrated the proper stance. Feet shoulder width. "Don't lock your elbows. Breathe out when you pull the trigger." He handed it back. "Try again." She did. The shot went wide, kicking up dust 10 feet from where she'd been aiming. Cole didn't comment on the miss. He just stood behind her, adjusted her grip, moved her feet half an inch to the left. Again. This time the shot hit closer. Not where she'd wanted, but closer. They spent 2 hours like that, Cole making small corrections while Eliza fired round after round until her ears rang and her hands shook. When they finally stopped, she'd managed to hit the fence post he'd designated as a target 3 times out of 20. "Not bad," Cole said, and it was the closest thing to praise she'd heard from him. "I'm terrible." "You're learning. There's a difference." He reloaded the gun and handed it back to her. "Keep this on you from now on, all the time." "Why?" "Because I can't always be here, and because you need to be able to protect yourself." There was something in his voice that made her look at him sharply. "Has something happened?" "No, but it will eventually. It always does." Cole turned toward the house. "There's coffee if you want it." That was the end of the conversation, but Eliza tucked the gun into her apron pocket, and from that day forward she never left the house without it. The trouble when it came started small. It was mid-October, the air turning sharp with the promise of winter. Cole had been gone for a week, tracking a gang that had robbed a payroll wagon 2 territories over. Eliza was getting ready to make the daily walk to the general store when she heard voices outside. Male voices, rough and loud, already half drunk despite the early hour. She looked through the window and saw 3 men standing in front of the house. She didn't recognize any of them. Drifters, probably, or cowhands from one of the ranches. They were passing a bottle back and forth and laughing about something. One of them noticed her watching and grinned, showing gaps where teeth used to be. "There she is," he called out. "Maddox's pretty little wife." Eliza stepped back from the window. Her hand went automatically to the gun in her pocket. "Come on out, darling," another one yelled. "We just want to talk." She stayed where she was. The smart thing was to wait them out, to ignore them until they got bored and left. Cole had told her never to engage with drunks. Nothing good ever came from it. But the men didn't leave. They kept shouting, their comments getting cruder, their laughter getting meaner. One of them threw something at the door, a rock or a bottle. She couldn't tell. It hit with a crack that made her jump. "Your husband ain't here to protect you," the first man called. "Why don't you come out and be neighborly?" Eliza's heart was hammering. She could feel sweat gathering at the base of her spine despite the cool air. She thought about going out the back, heading to the boarding house or the general store, but that would mean showing them she was scared. That would mean running. She walked to the door and opened it. All 3 men went quiet, surprised that she'd actually come out. Eliza stood on the porch with her hand in her pocket, gripping the revolver tight. "My husband will be back soon," she said, pleased that her voice didn't shake. "You'd be smart to leave before then." The gap-toothed man laughed. "That's so. Well, we heard Maddox is 3 days' ride from here, chasing ghosts. Seems like you're all alone." "I'm not alone." "No?" He looked around with exaggerated confusion. "Don't see nobody else." Eliza pulled the gun out of her pocket and leveled it at his chest. Her hand was steady. All those hours of practice had given her that much, at least. The men stopped laughing. "I can put 3 rounds center mass before you take 2 steps, Eliza said. "You want to test whether I'm bluffing?" The gap-toothed man raised his hands, still grinning but with less confidence now. "Easy there, darling. We were just having some fun." "Find your fun somewhere else." "You're not going to shoot. Women don't shoot. Try me." They stared at each other. Eliza's finger rested on the trigger, not pulling, but ready. She could feel her pulse in her throat, could taste copper in her mouth. If she had to shoot, could she do it? Could she actually pull the trigger and watch a man fall? She didn't know. But she kept the gun level and her expression hard. Finally, the man spat into the dust. "Crazy woman. Come on, boys. This ain't worth it." They walked away, still muttering and laughing, but they went. Eliza watched until they'd rounded the corner and disappeared from sight. Then she went back inside, closed the door, and locked it. Her hands started shaking then. She sat down hard on one of the chairs and put her head between her knees, breathing through her nose until the nausea passed. She'd stood her ground. She hadn't run. She hadn't broken. But she'd come close. When Cole returned 3 days later, she told him what had happened. He listened without interrupting, his expression getting darker with each word. "You did good," he said when she finished. "You kept your head." "I was terrified. Fear's fine. Panic's what'll kill you." Cole stood and walked to the window, looking out at the street. "You know any of them?" "No, I'd never seen them before." "Describe them." Eliza did. Cole's jaw tightened. "I know who they are. Ride for a ranch about 30 miles south. The owner's got a reputation for hiring anyone who'll work cheap, no questions asked." He turned back to her. "They touch you?" "No, I didn't give them the chance." Something that might have been approval flickered across his face. "Good. I'll pay them a visit tomorrow. Make sure they understand that what happened was a mistake they won't make twice." "What are you going to do?" "What needs doing?" Cole left before dawn the next morning. He was gone for 2 days. When he came back, his knuckles were bruised, and there was a cut above his eye that he wouldn't explain. But the men never came back, and word spread quickly through town that the lawman's wife was not to be trifled with. It should have made Eliza feel safer. Instead, it made her feel marked. The incident changed something between her and Cole, though. He started leaving her detailed instructions about where he was going and when he'd be back. He showed her where he kept his spare ammunition, his extra rifle, the money he'd saved. He taught her how to bar the door from the inside and which neighbors would help if she needed it. "You're making it sound like you're preparing for a war," Eliza said one evening. "Out here, you're always preparing for a war. The only question is when it's going to start." "That's a cheerful way to live." "It's an honest way to live." Cole cleaned his rifle with practiced efficiency. "This territory's not tame yet. Won't be for years, maybe decades. People like to pretend civilization's taken root, but it's a thin layer. Scratch the surface and you'll find blood and dirt." "Is that why you stay? Because you like the violence?" Cole's hand stilled. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. "I stay because someone has to. Left to their own devices, people will tear each other apart. The law is the only thing standing between order and chaos. And you're the law." "In this territory, yeah, for better or worse." Eliza set down the shirt she'd been mending. "Do you ever wonder if it's worth it? All this fighting to keep people safe who don't even appreciate it?" "Every day." Cole went back to cleaning the rifle. But wondering and quitting are two different things. They didn't talk much after that, but Eliza thought about his words long into the night. November brought the first real snow. It fell heavy and wet, blanketing everything in white that turned to gray slush within hours. The temperature dropped until Eliza could see her breath inside the house, even with the stove going full blast. Cole chopped wood until his hands blistered, stacking it against the side of the house in preparation for the long winter ahead. Eliza helped where she could, carrying armloads inside, organizing it by size. They worked side by side without speaking, their breath making clouds in the cold air. The town seemed to hunker down, preparing for the hard months. Fewer people on the streets, more smoke rising from chimneys, a sense of things closing in, getting smaller. Eliza had just finished hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard the horses. A lot of horses, coming fast. She dropped the wet shirt she'd been holding and ran to the front of the house. Cole was already there, standing in the street, his hand resting on his gun. 6 riders were approaching, moving at a gallop that kicked up frozen mud. They pulled up 20 feet away. The lead rider was a big man with a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. He smiled when he saw Cole, but there was nothing friendly in it. "Maddox," he said. "Been a while." "Not long enough, Garrett." Cole's voice was flat. "What do you want?" "Just passing through. Thought I'd say hello to an old friend." "We were never friends." Garrett's smile widened. "That hurts, Cole. Really does." His eyes shifted past Cole and landed on Eliza. "This the new wife I've been hearing about?" "That's none of your concern." "Pretty thing? Delicate. Not what I'd have expected for a man like you. Garrett leaned forward in his saddle. Tell me, does she know what you did up in Montana? About that family, Turn around and ride out, Cole interrupted, his voice gone dangerous. Right now. Or what? You gonna shoot me in front of all these witnesses? Garrett gestured to his men. I came in peace, Maddox. I'm not breaking any laws. You're breathing. That's close enough. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. Eliza could see people gathering in doorways, watching. Agnes stood in front of the general store, her face pale. Dutch had come out of the saloon, one hand hidden behind his back. Garrett's smile finally faded. You think you're untouchable because you wear that tin star. But stars come off easy, and when yours does, I'll be there. Looking forward to it. Garrett spat and wheeled his horse around. His men followed, kicking up mud as they rode out the way they'd come. But as they passed the house, one of them, a lean man with dead eyes, looked directly at Eliza and tipped his hat. The gesture felt like a threat. Cole didn't move until they'd disappeared from sight. Then he turned to Eliza. Get inside. Who were they? Inside, now. She obeyed. Cole followed, closing the door and barring it behind him. He went immediately to the gun rack, checking each rifle, loading the ones that weren't. Cole, what's happening? Garrett Reeves. Him and his boys have been running a protection racket through the territory for years. Ranches mostly, some mines. Pay up or things start burning. Cole's movements were sharp, angry. I've been trying to bring him in for 3 years, but he's smart, never leaves evidence, never stays in one place long enough to catch. What did he mean about Montana? Cole's hands stilled. Nothing that concerns you. If those men are dangerous, they're worse than dangerous, they're patient. He turned to face her. Garrett showing up here wasn't random. He came to make a point. What point? That he knows where I live. That he knows I have a wife now. Cole's expression was grim. You're a target, Eliza. They'll use you to get to me if they can. Fear hit her like cold water. So what do we do? You stay inside. You keep that gun on you every second. And if anyone you don't know approaches this house, you shoot first and ask questions later. For how long? Until I can find Garrett and end this. Eliza wrapped her arms around herself. The house suddenly felt smaller, more vulnerable. You can't protect me and hunt him at the same time. I know. Cole loaded the last rifle and set it by the door. That's why I'm not leaving. What about your territory, the other towns? They'll have to manage without me for a while. He stayed true to his word. For the next week, Cole barely left the house. He slept in shifts, always keeping one ear open for trouble. He had Eliza move her bed away from the window. He showed her how to brace the door with a chair so it couldn't be kicked in. The waiting was worse than the confrontation had been. Every sound outside made Eliza jump. Every stranger passing on the street made her reach for her gun. Sleep became a luxury she couldn't afford. On the 8th day, Cole made a decision. I can't sit here forever, he said over breakfast. Garrett's trying to trap me, keep me pinned down. I won't give him that. So what are you going to do? Well, go on the offensive, track him down before he makes his move. Cole looked at her across the table. But that means leaving you here alone. Then take me with you. No. Why not? Because where I'm going is too dangerous. And staying here isn't? Eliza set down her coffee cup hard enough to slosh liquid onto the table. If they come for me while you're gone, I'm dead. At least if I'm with you, I have a chance. You'd slow me down. The word stung, but Eliza pushed past it. Then teach me not to. You've been teaching me to shoot. Teach me the rest. Cole studied her for a long moment. You have no idea what you're asking for. So tell me. I'm talking about riding hard for days, sleeping on frozen ground, tracking men who'll kill you without thinking twice. This isn't some adventure, Eliza. It's ugly and brutal, and there's no guarantee either of us comes back. I know that. Do you? Because once we start, there's no changing your mind. No going back because it's too hard or too scary. Eliza met his eyes. I stood in this yard a month ago and pointed a gun at 3 men. I didn't shoot, but I would have if I'd needed to. I'm not the same woman who stepped off that stage. You said it yourself. This land shows people what they're made of. Well, I'm ready to find out. Something shifted in Cole's expression. Not quite respect, but maybe the beginning of it. You're serious about this? Completely. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the gray morning. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. If I take you, you follow orders. No arguments, no hesitation. What I say goes. Understood? Understood. And if things go bad, if it comes down to a fight, you don't freeze. You shoot to kill or you don't shoot at all. There's no middle ground in this. Eliza's mouth was dry, but she nodded. I can do that. Cole turned back to face her. All right, we leave in an hour. Pack light. Only what you can carry. Wear layers. And Eliza? He paused. If you have any doubts, speak up now. Because once we're out there, I can't protect you the way I could here. I don't need you to protect me, Eliza said. I need you to teach me how to protect myself. For the first time since she'd known him, Cole almost smiled. Then let's get to work. They rode out before noon, heading north into territory Eliza had never seen. The land here was rougher, broken up by ravines and scattered pine forests that looked black against the snow. Cole set a brutal pace, stopping only when the horses needed rest. He'd been right about the sleeping arrangements. That first night, they made camp in a shallow depression sheltered from the wind. Cole built a small fire, just enough to heat coffee and beans, then kicked dirt over it until only embers remained. Why put it out? Eliza asked, shivering despite the layers she wore. Because fire can be seen for miles. We don't announce our position. He handed her a blanket. Get some sleep. I'll take first watch. I can help watch. You need rest more than I do. Sleep. Eliza tried, but the ground was frozen hard beneath her bedroll, and every sound made her tense. The crack of ice, the rustle of wind through dead grass, the distant howl of something she didn't want to think about. She must have dozed eventually, because she woke to Cole shaking her shoulder. Your turn, he said. Anything moves, you wake me. Don't try to handle it yourself. He was asleep within minutes, his rifle cradled against his chest. Eliza sat with her back to a boulder, the revolver in her lap, and watched the darkness. Nothing happened, but the hours crawled by like days, and when Cole finally stirred at dawn, Eliza felt hollowed out and brittle. They rode again, and again. Days blurred together in a haze of cold and exhaustion. Cole taught as they went, how to read tracks in snow, how to tell if someone had passed through recently, how to use the terrain for cover. He was a harsh teacher, correcting mistakes without sympathy, pushing her when she wanted to stop. But he was also patient in his own way. When Eliza's hands went numb and she couldn't feel the reins anymore, he showed her how to tuck them under her arms to warm them. When her horse started to favor one leg, he taught her how to check for stones in the hoof. Small things, practical things that kept her alive. On the fourth day, they found the camp. It was tucked into a valley between two hills, protected from the wind. 5 men sat around a fire, passing a bottle and laughing about something. Their horses were picketed nearby, and Eliza could see supplies stacked under a canvas tarp. Cole pulled them back before they could be spotted. They dismounted and crept to the ridge, lying flat to peer over the edge. That them? Eliza whispered. Son, 3 of them. Don't see Garrett or the one with the dead eyes. Cole studied the camp with the focus of a predator. They're careless. Probably think they're far enough out that no one will find them. What do we do? We wait. Garrett will show eventually. They waited. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky, weak and pale behind clouds. The men below kept drinking, their voices carrying up the hill in fragments that made no sense. Eliza's legs cramped. Her hands ached from gripping the rifle Cole had given her, but she didn't move, didn't complain. Cole had said this was part of it, the waiting, the discomfort, the endless patience required to get the job done. Just when she thought she couldn't stay still another minute, Cole tensed beside her. There, he breathed. 2 riders were approaching the camp from the east. Even at a distance, Eliza recognized Garrett's bulk. The other rider was the dead-eyed man from town. Cole slid back from the ridge, pulling Eliza with him. When they were far enough away, he spoke in a low, urgent voice. 5 against 2. Bad odds, even worse if we let them stay together. He checked his rifle, his movements quick and efficient. I'm going to get closer. Pick off Garrett first. Once the shooting starts, things will get chaotic. You stay up here, cover the camp. Anyone runs this direction, you shoot them. Can you do that? Eliza's heart was hammering so hard she could barely hear. Yes. Cole grabbed her shoulder, forcing her to look at him. I mean it, Eliza. You hesitate, and we're both dead. You understand? I understand. He held her gaze a moment longer, then nodded and slipped away into the rocks. Eliza crawled back to the ridge and watched. Cole moved like a shadow, using the terrain for cover, getting closer to the camp with each passing minute. The men below had no idea he was there. They were relaxed now, confident. Garrett was dismounting, saying something that made the others laugh. Then Cole stood up, rifle raised, and fired. The shot echoed across the valley like thunder. Garrett went down hard, clutching his shoulder. The camp exploded into chaos. Men scrambling for weapons, horses screaming and pulling at their ropes, voices shouting over each other in confusion. Cole fired again. One of the men dropped. The others scattered, diving for cover behind rocks and supply crates. Muzzle flashes lit up the growing dusk as they returned fire, bullets whining through the air and kicking up dirt around Cole's position. Eliza watched it all through the rifle's sights, her finger on the trigger, trying to track movement in the chaos. Her breath came in short gasps. Everything in her wanted to run, to hide, to be anywhere but here watching men try to kill each other. Then she saw him, the dead-eyed man running up the hill toward her position. He must have spotted the muzzle flash from Cole's rifle, must have realized there was a shooter above the camp. He was coming right for her. Eliza's hands started to shake. She tried to steady the rifle, tried to line up the shot, but the man was moving fast, dodging between rocks. 50 yards, 40. He still hadn't seen her. 30 yards. Eliza's finger tightened on the trigger. 20 yards. The man's eyes found her. He raised his pistol. Eliza fired. The recoil slammed into her shoulder, knocking her back. When she looked again, the man was on the ground, clutching his leg and screaming. She'd hit him. Not where she'd aimed. She'd been going for center mass, but she'd hit him. He was still moving, still reaching for his gun. Eliza worked the rifle's action, chambering another round. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. Everything had gone quiet and clear and simple. She fired again. This time, the man stopped moving. Eliza stared at what she'd done, at the body lying in the snow, blood spreading dark and final. She'd killed a man. The thought didn't feel real. It was like watching herself from a distance, like this was happening to someone else. More shots from below snapped her back. The fight was still going. She forced herself to look away from the body and focus on the camp. 2 men were down. Garrett was behind cover, still firing despite his wounded shoulder. The other 2 were pinned down by Cole's position. Then one of them made a break for the horses. He was fast, sprinting across open ground while his friend laid down covering fire. Eliza tracked him with the rifle, breathed out, fired. The man stumbled, but kept going. She'd hit him somewhere non-vital. She fired again. He went down 10 feet from the horses. The last man standing saw what had happened and threw his gun down, hands raised high. "Don't shoot," he yelled. "I'm done. I surrender." The shooting stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. Cole emerged from cover, rifle trained on the surrendering man. "On your knees, hands behind your head." The man obeyed. Cole approached carefully, kicked away the discarded weapon, and secured the man's hands with rope he'd brought for exactly this purpose. Garrett was still alive, groaning behind his cover. Cole walked over and looked down at him. "Should have stayed in Montana," Cole said. "You're making a mistake, Maddox. My people will—" "Your people are dead or running. You're done, Garrett." Cole bound Garrett's hands and checked the other bodies. 3 dead, including the one Eliza had killed. 2 wounded. 1 surrendered. Then he looked up at the ridge where Eliza still lay. She stood on shaking legs and made her way down, the rifle clutched in both hands. When she reached the camp, she couldn't look at the bodies, couldn't look at what she'd done. Cole took the rifle from her and set it aside. "You all right?" Eliza nodded, though it was a lie. "You did good. Kept your head when it mattered." "I killed someone." "You did what you had to do. He would have killed you otherwise. Killed me too, probably." Cole turned back to the prisoners. "It doesn't get easier. Anyone who says it does is lying, but you learn to live with it." They made camp right there, using Garrett's supplies. Cole kept watch over the prisoners while Eliza sat by the fire, staring into the flames. She'd crossed a line today, become something different. The girl from Boston who'd fainted at the sight of blood was gone completely now. In her place was someone harder, someone capable of pulling a trigger and watching a man fall. She should have felt horror, guilt, something. Instead, she just felt tired. Cole brought her coffee and sat down beside her. They didn't speak for a long time. Finally, Eliza said, "What happens now?" "We take them back. There's a territorial marshal 2 days south. He'll handle the trial and sentencing." Cole sipped his coffee. "Garrett will hang. The others might get prison if they're lucky. And us? We go home. Back to Forge Creek. Back to our life." Our life. It was the first time he'd called it that. Eliza looked over at him. In the firelight, his face was all angles and shadows. "I didn't break," she said. "No, you didn't. I wanted to. When I saw that man coming at me, every part of me was screaming to run. But you didn't." "No." Eliza turned back to the fire. "Is this what it's always like? This scared?" "Pretty much. You just get better at functioning through it." They sat in silence again. Above them, stars were coming out, hard and bright in the frozen sky. Somewhere in the darkness, one of the prisoners groaned. Cole stood to check on them, leaving Eliza alone with her thoughts and her coffee and the weight of what she'd done. She'd survived. More than that, she'd fought. And somehow, impossibly, she'd won. The journey back took 4 days instead of 2. The prisoners slowed them down, and Cole refused to push the horses harder than necessary. Garrett rode with his hands bound to the saddle horn, his shoulder wrapped in bandages that were already seeping through. The man who'd surrendered kept his head down and didn't speak. The wounded one, the one Eliza had shot in the leg, could barely stay upright, fever making him shake so hard his teeth chattered. Cole watched him with the cold assessment of someone calculating odds. On the 3rd night, he pulled Eliza aside while the prisoners slept. "He's not going to make it to the marshal," Cole said quietly. "Infection's setting in. I can smell it from here." Eliza looked over at the man. Even in sleep, his face was twisted with pain. "What can we do?" "Nothing. We don't have the supplies to treat it properly, and even if we did, it's too far gone." Cole's voice was matter-of-fact, discussing the man's death like it was a weather report. "He'll probably be dead by morning." "That doesn't bother you?" "He made his choices. This is just where those choices led." Cole met her eyes. "You feeling guilty about shooting him?" Eliza considered the question honestly. "No, that's what bothers me. I thought I would, but I don't." "Good. Guilt's a luxury you can't afford out here. You did what needed doing. He'd have killed you without thinking twice." The man died just before dawn, exactly as Cole had predicted. They buried him in a shallow grave marked with rocks, and then they rode on. Neither the other prisoners nor Cole seemed particularly moved by it. Eliza wondered when she'd stopped being shocked by that kind of callousness, and realized it had probably been weeks ago. They reached the marshal's office on a gray afternoon that threatened snow. The town was bigger than Forge Creek, maybe 100 buildings, with actual streets instead of just rutted tracks. The marshal himself was a grizzled man in his 60s who took one look at Garrett and let out a low whistle. "Thought you were dead," he said. Garrett spat blood. "Not yet. Give it time." The marshal turned to Cole. "I'll need statements, charges, all the paperwork." "You'll have it." Cole dismounted and helped Eliza down. She was stiff from days in the saddle, her legs barely holding her weight. "My wife and I need a room for the night, somewhere with a real bed." The word wife still sounded strange coming from Cole's mouth. The marshal noticed Eliza for the first time and raised his eyebrows. "This the girl I heard about? The one from Boston?" "That's her. Heard she shot one of Garrett's men." "She did." Cole's tone didn't invite further questions. "The hotel still on Main Street?" "Yeah. Ask for Martha. Tell her I sent you." The marshal gestured to his deputies, who came forward to take custody of the prisoners. "I'll see you in the morning, Maddox. We've got a lot to discuss." The hotel was small but clean, run by a woman who took one look at Eliza's mud-stained dress and exhausted face and immediately brought up hot water for a bath. It was the first time Eliza had been properly warm in days. She sat in the copper tub until the water went cold, washing away the grime and blood and the feeling of things she didn't want to name. When she emerged, wearing the spare dress she'd packed, Cole was sitting at the small table by the window, writing. Papers were spread out in front of him, his report for the marshal, she assumed. "Feel better?" he asked without looking up. "Cleaner, at least." "Close enough?" He signed something with a flourish and set down the pen. "We'll stay here tonight, handle the formalities in the morning, then head back to Forge Creek." Should be home by tomorrow evening if we push. Home. Eliza sat down on the edge of the bed, testing the word in her mind. Forge Creek didn't feel like home. It barely felt like a place she knew. But it was where she lived, where her life was, such as it was. Cole, she said, what you said to the marshal, about me being your wife. What about it? You've never called me that before, not directly. Cole looked at her then, his expression unreadable. That's what you are, legally speaking. Just legally? He was quiet for a long moment. What are you asking, Eliza? She wasn't sure herself. Out there, in the fight, I felt like we were partners, like we were working together instead of just existing in the same space. And now we're going back to Forge Creek, and I don't know if that changes or if everything just goes back to how it was. Cole stood and walked to the window, looking out at the street below. Things are different now. Can't pretend they're not. You've seen what I do, how I live. You were part of it. That changes things whether we want it to or not. Is that good or bad? I don't know yet. He turned back to face her. You held your own out there, did better than most men I've worked with. But that doesn't mean I know what to do with you now. You don't have to do anything with me. I'm not asking for, I don't know, romance or declarations or whatever this is supposed to be. Then what are you asking for? Eliza struggled to find the words. Respect, I guess. Recognition that I'm not just someone who lives in your house and cooks your meals. That I'm capable of more than you thought. I already knew you were capable. You proved that the day you agreed to this arrangement. Cole crossed his arms. But capability and partnership aren't the same thing. Partners trust each other. They rely on each other. We barely know each other. Then maybe we should change that. Maybe. Cole moved toward the door. I'm going to check on the horses. You should get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be long. He left before Eliza could respond. She sat there on the bed in the quiet room, listening to his footsteps fade down the hallway. She'd killed a man 4 days ago. She'd ridden through frozen country and slept on hard ground and kept watch in the dark. She'd proven herself in ways she'd never imagined needing to prove. And Cole still kept her at arm's length. Maybe that would never change. Maybe this was all they'd ever be. Two people bound by a contract and necessity, sharing a house, but never truly sharing a life. The thought hurt more than it should have. Eliza lay down fully clothed and stared at the ceiling until exhaustion finally dragged her under. They rode into Forge Creek just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that looked like fire. Word of what had happened must have traveled ahead of them because people came out to watch them pass. Agnes stood in front of the general store, her expression inscrutable. Dutch leaned against the saloon post, nodding approval. Sarah appeared from somewhere and gave Eliza a small wave. The stares felt different this time. Not quite welcoming, but not hostile either. More like reassessment. Like the town was seeing her fresh and trying to figure out where she fit now. Cole rode straight to the house and dismounted. Eliza followed, her body moving on autopilot. Everything ached. She felt hollowed out, scraped clean. Inside, the house looked exactly as they'd left it. The same sparse furniture, the same clean surfaces, the same feeling of being temporary like neither of them really lived there. But something had shifted. Eliza couldn't name it, but she felt it in the air between them. Cole started unloading supplies while Eliza lit the stove and put coffee on. They moved around each other with practiced efficiency, not speaking, not needing to. When the coffee was ready, Cole poured 2 cups and brought them to the table. He sat down heavily, like the weight of the past week was finally catching up to him. You did good out there, he said. You already told me that. I'm telling you again, most people would have frozen up. You didn't. Eliza wrapped her hands around her cup. I was terrified the whole time. I know, I could see it, but you pushed through anyway. That takes something most people don't have. What's that? Backbone. It should have felt like a compliment. Instead, it felt like an acknowledgement of something Eliza had already known about herself but hadn't been allowed to show before. My father used to say I was too stubborn for my own good, she said. He meant it as criticism, like it was something I needed to fix. Out here, stubborn keeps you alive. Back east, they probably call it contrary or difficult, but that's because they've got the luxury of softness. We don't. Eliza looked at him over the rim of her cup. Do you ever miss it? Having luxuries? Being soft? Never had them to miss. I grew up hard. This is all I know. What about before you came west? Cole's expression closed off. That's not a conversation I'm interested in having. I'm your wife. Don't I deserve to know something about who you are? You know what matters. The rest is just noise. Eliza set down her cup with more force than necessary. That's not fair. I've told you about Boston, about my father, about everything that led me here, and you've given me nothing. Because there's nothing to give. I'm not complicated, Eliza. I enforce the law. I keep the peace. That's it. There's no grand story, no tragic past worth talking about. Everyone has a past, and I've chosen not to share mine. Respect that. They stared at each other across the table. Eliza wanted to push, to demand answers, to break through whatever wall Cole had built around himself. But she could see in his eyes that it wouldn't work. He'd shut down completely, and pressing would only drive him further away. Fine, she said. Keep your secrets. I intend to. The silence that followed was brittle. Eliza finished her coffee and stood. I'm going to bed. It's barely dark. I'm tired. She didn't wait for a response. She went to her bed, pulled the curtain, and lay down with her back to the rest of the room. She heard Cole moving around for another hour, cleaning his guns, organizing supplies, doing all the small maintenance tasks that came with returning from a trip. Then the lamp went out and she heard him settle onto his own bed. The darkness pressed in, heavy and complete. Eliza closed her eyes and tried not to think about how lonely it was possible to feel while sharing a room with another person. The next few weeks settled into a new rhythm. Cole went back to his usual patrols, though he was gone for shorter stretches now. Eliza fell back into the routine of keeping the house, but there was an edge to it that hadn't been there before. She moved through her days with a restlessness she couldn't name. The town's attitude toward her had shifted. People nodded when she passed now. A few even spoke to her, brief exchanges about weather or supplies, but conversation nonetheless. Agnes still charged her too much at the general store, but she did it with less hostility. Dutch started tipping his hat when he saw her. Sarah noticed the change immediately. You've got their respect now, she said one afternoon over tea. Took some doing, but you've got it. I killed a man, Eliza said bluntly. That's why they respect me. Maybe partly, but it's more than that. You went out there when you didn't have to. You backed up your husband when he needed it. That matters to people here. I'm not sure that's something I want to be known for. Sarah studied her over the rim of her teacup. How are things between you and Cole? The same as always, polite, distant. That's a shame. Is it? We both knew what this was when we agreed to it. Maybe. But I've seen the way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching. There's something there, even if he won't admit it. Eliza's throat tightened. You're seeing things that aren't there. Am I? Sarah set down her cup. I've known Cole Maddox for 5 years. He's the most closed-off man I've ever met. Doesn't let anyone in, doesn't share anything that matters. But with you, there's cracks. Small ones, but they're there. He barely talks to me. He talks to you more than he talks to anyone else in this town. Trust me on that. Eliza wanted to believe it, but wanting and believing were two different things. She changed the subject, and Sarah let her, but the conversation stayed with Eliza for days afterward. Winter came down hard in December. The snow that had been intermittent became constant, piling up in drifts that reached the windows. The temperature dropped so low that water froze in the basin overnight. Cole spent hours each day keeping the stove fed, making sure they had enough wood to last. They were trapped inside together more than they'd ever been. There was nowhere to go, nothing to do except exist in the same small space. It should have been unbearable. Instead, something unexpected happened. They started talking, not about anything important at first, just small observations about the weather, about supplies running low, about a loose board in the floor that needed fixing. But gradually, the conversations deepened. Cole told her about a horse he'd had as a boy, how he'd raised it from a colt and lost it to colic when he was 12. Eliza told him about piano lessons she'd hated, about a teacher who'd rapped her knuckles with a ruler every time she hit a wrong note. They played cards in the evening, working through a battered deck Cole had owned for years. He taught her poker, and she was surprised to find she had a knack for it. She won more often than she lost, which seemed to amuse him. You've got a good face for it, he said one night after she'd bluffed him out of a big hand. What does that mean? Means you don't show what you're thinking. Most people, you can read their tells. But you? Nothing. I learned that in Boston. Social calls required a lot of smiling at people you couldn't stand. Cole laughed. An actual laugh, not just an exhale through his nose. It transformed his face, made him look years younger. Sounds miserable. It was, but I got good at hiding it. Useful skill out here, too, just in different ways. They fell quiet. The only sound the crackle of the fire and the wind howling outside. It was almost comfortable, Eliza realized, this silence between them. Not awkward or strained, just present. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Cole tensed slightly. "Depends on the question." "Why did you really agree to marry me? The truth, not the version about honoring your word." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he set down his cards and leaned back in his chair. "You want the truth? I was lonely. Not in a way I could admit to anyone, including myself. But this job, this life, it's isolating. Everyone in town knows me, but nobody really knows me. They see the badge and the gun, and they keep their distance. And I told myself that was fine, that I didn't need anything else. But when your father made his offer, when he said you were looking for a fresh start same as anyone else out here, I thought maybe it wouldn't be so bad. Having someone around, someone who wasn't from this place, who didn't already have all their opinions set about who I was." Eliza absorbed this. "So you wanted a companion?" "I wanted someone who wouldn't leave. Everyone leaves eventually, out here. They die, or they move on, or they just disappear. But a wife, that's supposed to be permanent, or at least more permanent than anything else." "That's remarkably honest. You asked for truth." Cole picked up his cards again. "Your turn. Why'd you really stay? And don't tell me it was because you had nowhere else to go. You're smart enough that you could have found something back east. Maybe not glamorous, but something." Eliza considered her answer carefully. "Because I was tired of being powerless. My whole life in Boston, I was decorative, meant to be looked at and married off, and that was it. No choices, no control, nothing that was actually mine. When I came here and you offered me this arrangement, it was the first time anyone had given me a choice about my own life. Even if the choices were limited, they were still mine to make. I stayed because here, I could become something other than what I'd been. And I was right. I did become something else. You became a killer." The words were blunt, but not cruel, just factual. "Yes," Eliza said, "I became that too. And I'm not sure how I feel about it yet." "You'll figure it out. Most people do, eventually." They played another hand. Cole won this time, and Eliza suspected he'd let her win the previous ones to build her confidence. "You're doing that thing again," she said. "What thing?" "Analyzing, calculating, trying to figure out what I'm thinking. Old habits, hard to break. You don't have to figure me out, Cole. You could just ask." He looked at her then, really looked at her, in a way that made something flutter in her chest. "Maybe I will sometime. I'd like that." The moment stretched between them, fragile and new. Then Cole cleared his throat and started gathering the cards. "It's late. We should get some sleep." And just like that, the walls were back up. But not quite as high as before. Progress, Eliza thought. Small, but real. She went to bed that night feeling something she hadn't felt in months. Not quite happiness, but close. Something like hope. The snow finally broke in late January, melting into mud that made the streets nearly impassable. Cole had been gone for 3 days, checking on homesteads to make sure everyone had survived the worst of the winter. Eliza was alone in the house when she found the envelope. It had been slipped under the door while she was out fetching water. Plain brown paper, her name written on the front in a hand she didn't recognize. Inside was a letter. And money. More money than she'd seen since leaving Boston. The letter was from her father's lawyer. It was brief and businesslike, explaining that the final settlement of her father's estate had been completed. After all debts were paid, there remained a small amount, enough, the lawyer noted, to book passage back east and establish herself modestly. The money felt heavy in her hands, real, tangible. It was freedom. She could leave. Right now, today, she could pack a bag and buy a ticket and be gone before Cole even knew. The marriage had been a transaction. There was nothing keeping her here except her own stubbornness. Eliza sat down at the table and stared at the money for a long time. 3 months ago, this would have been answered prayers. A way out, a way back, a return to everything she'd lost. But now? Now the thought of leaving made her chest tight. She thought about Boston, the gossip, the judgment, the suffocating propriety. She thought about being decorative again, powerless again, molded into whatever shape society deemed acceptable. Then she thought about Forge Creek, about the brutal cold and the endless work and the people who'd finally started to nod when she passed. About Sarah's terrible pie and Agnes's grudging respect and Dutch's knowing grins. About Cole. Complicated, closed off, impossible. Cole, who'd taught her to shoot and taken her into danger and looked at her sometimes like he was seeing someone he hadn't expected to find. The door opened. Cole stamped snow off his boots and hung his hat on the peg, then stopped when he saw her face. "What's wrong?" Eliza held up the letter. "My father's estate. Final settlement." He crossed the room and read over her shoulder. She felt him tense when he got to the part about the money. "That's good," he said carefully. That's real good, Eliza." "Is it?" "It means you've got options now. You're not trapped here anymore." She turned to look at him. "Is that what you think? That I've been trapped?" "Haven't you?" "Maybe at first, but not anymore." Cole's expression was unreadable. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't want to leave." The words hung in the air between them. Cole didn't move, didn't speak. He just looked at her like he was trying to solve an equation that didn't make sense. "You should think about this," he finally said. "Don't make a decision you'll regret." "I've been thinking about it since the moment I found the envelope, and I know what I want." "Eliza, I want to stay, Cole. Here. With you. Not because I have to, but because I choose to." He stepped back like she'd struck him. "You don't know what you're saying." "Yes, I do. For the first time in my life, I actually know what I'm saying." Eliza stood, holding the money out to him. "Take this. Use it for supplies or save it or burn it for all I care. I don't need it. I'm not leaving." Cole didn't take the money. "Why?" "Because this is my life now. This house, this town, this, whatever this is between us. It's not perfect and it's not easy, but it's mine. I chose it, and I'm choosing to keep it. Even though I can't give you what you probably want, romance and tenderness and all that, I'm not asking for that. I'm asking for partnership, for respect, for the thing we started to build when we went after Garrett. That's enough for me." Cole ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Eliza had learned meant he was struggling with something. "You're sure about this?" "Completely." He looked at her for another long moment. Then slowly he reached out and took the money from her hand. "I'll put this in the lockbox," he said quietly. "In case you change your mind later." "I won't." "Maybe not. But it'll be there anyway." He walked to the corner where he kept his strong box, unlocked it, and placed the money inside. When he turned back, something in his face had shifted. The walls were still there, but they'd lowered, just a little. "All right then," he said. "Guess you're staying." "Guess I am." They looked at each other across the small room. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the shutters. Inside, the fire crackled and popped. And for the first time since Eliza had arrived in Forge Creek, the silence between them felt like possibility instead of distance. Cole cleared his throat. "I should check the horses." "You just got back." "I know, but I need to." He trailed off, then shook his head. "I'll be back in a bit." He left, closing the door carefully behind him. Eliza stood alone in the house and smiled. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. When Cole came back inside an hour later, his boots were caked with mud, and his expression had settled into something thoughtful. He hung his coat, washed his hands in the basin, and stood there for a moment like he was working up to something. "I've been thinking," he said finally. Eliza set down the shirt she'd been mending. About what you said. About partnership." He turned to face her. "If you're serious about staying, then things need to change. Not everything, but some things. This arrangement we've got, it was built on necessity and survival. But if it's going to be more than that, if it's going to actually work, we need to be honest about what we want from it." "All right, what do you want?" Cole crossed his arms. A gesture she'd learned meant he was uncomfortable. "I want someone I can trust at my back. Someone who won't run when things get hard. And I think maybe I want someone who actually knows who I am, not just what I do." It was the most vulnerable thing she'd ever heard him say. Eliza felt her throat tighten. I want the same thing, she said quietly. I want to matter, not as decoration or obligation, but as someone who actually contributes something real. You already do that. Then I want you to acknowledge it, not just once in a while when I've proven myself, but consistently. I want to be your partner, Cole. Actually, your partner. He nodded slowly. I can do that, or at least I can try. That's all I'm asking. They looked at each other across the small room, and something shifted between them. Not love exactly, they weren't there yet, might never be, but something solid and real, a foundation they could build on. We should probably eat, Cole said, breaking the moment. I brought supplies from the Hendersons' place. Sarah sent pie. Of course she did. They ate dinner together that night the way they always did, but the silence felt different, comfortable instead of strained. When they were done, Cole didn't immediately retreat to his paperwork. Instead, he poured them both coffee and sat back down. Tell me something about Boston I don't know, he said. Eliza blinked, surprised. Like what? Anything, something that mattered to you. She thought for a moment. There was a library near my house. 3 stories, more books than I could count. I used to go there every Thursday afternoon and just disappear into other worlds. My father thought it was frivolous, all that reading, said it put ideas in my head that weren't proper for a young woman. What kind of ideas? That I could be more than just someone's wife, that I could have thoughts and opinions that mattered, that the world was bigger than drawing rooms and social calls. Eliza smiled at the memory. I loved that library more than anywhere else in the world. Cole was quiet for a moment. We don't have a library here, but I've got some books. You're welcome to them. I've already read all of yours twice. Then we'll order more. Put it on my account at the general store. It was a small thing, but it felt enormous. Eliza felt something warm spreading in her chest. Thank you, she said. It's just books. No, it's not. Cole cleared his throat, uncomfortable again. Your turn to ask something. What happened in Montana? His expression closed immediately. I told you. I know what you told me, but Garrett mentioned it. Said something about a family. And you shut him down so fast I knew it mattered. Eliza leaned forward. You said if we're doing this, we need to be honest. So be honest with me. Cole's hands tightened around his cup. For a long moment she thought he'd refuse. Then he let out a long breath. There was a homesteader family. Father, mother, 3 kids. They'd filed a claim on land that a cattle baron wanted. He sent men to run them off. When they wouldn't go, the men set fire to the house. The whole family died. All 5 of them. Eliza felt her stomach turn. That's horrible. I was the law in that territory at the time. I was supposed to protect them, but I was 2 days away, tracking down a different problem, and by the time I got there, it was too late, just ashes and bodies. That wasn't your fault, wasn't it? I knew the cattle baron was making threats. I knew the family was vulnerable, but I thought I had time. Thought I could handle the other situation first and still get back before anything happened. Cole's voice was flat, emotionless, but Eliza could see the tension in his shoulders. I was wrong, and 5 people died because of it. What happened to the men who did it? I found them, all 6 of them. He met her eyes. They didn't make it to trial. Eliza understood what he wasn't saying. And Garrett knew about this? Garrett was one of the cattle baron's associates. Not directly involved, but he knew. He's been holding it over me ever since, thinking it makes me weak, thinking guilt will make me hesitate. Will it? No. I learned my lesson in Montana. You can't save everyone. All you can do is make the hard choices and live with the consequences. They sat in silence for a while. Eliza thought about what he'd told her, about the weight he carried. She'd known Cole was a hard man, but she hadn't understood the reasons behind it. The way trauma could calcify into something that looked like coldness, but was really just survival. I'm sorry that happened to you, she said finally. It happened to them, not me. I'm just the one who has to remember it. That's a kind of suffering too. Cole shrugged. Maybe, but it's what I signed up for. He stood and started clearing the table. Eliza helped, and they worked in comfortable silence. When everything was cleaned and put away, Cole paused by the door to his side of the room. Thank you, he said. For what? For not treating me different after hearing that. Why would I? We've all got things we carry. Mine are just different than yours. Something that might have been gratitude flickered across his face. Then he nodded and disappeared behind the curtain. Eliza got ready for bed, thinking about the conversation, about the walls that were slowly coming down, about the partnership they were building, piece by careful piece. It wasn't the life she'd imagined for herself, but maybe that was the point. Maybe the best lives were the ones you built yourself, not the ones handed to you. Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it transformed everything. The snow melted into streams that cut through the prairie. Grass emerged, tentative and green. Wildflowers appeared seemingly overnight, splashing color across the brown landscape. Eliza had survived her first winter in the territory. The achievement felt monumental. The town noticed, too. Agnes actually smiled at her one morning, a brief upturn of her mouth that disappeared almost immediately, but was unmistakable. Dutch started inviting her and Cole to the occasional meal at the saloon, where the food was terrible but the company was surprisingly decent. Even the women who'd ignored her for months began nodding, then speaking, then eventually including her in their conversations about supplies and gardens and the general difficulty of frontier life. Sarah was delighted by the change. "I told you they'd come around," she said one afternoon. They were sitting on the porch of the boarding house watching the street. "Just took them a while to see what I saw from the start." "And what's that?" "That you're stubborn enough to make it here." Sarah poured more tea. "How are things with Cole?" "Better. Different. We actually talk now." "About what?" "Everything. Nothing. Whatever comes up." Eliza smiled. "It's strange. We've been married almost 6 months, and I'm only now starting to feel like I actually know him." "That's how it goes sometimes. Marriage doesn't create intimacy automatically. You have to build it, same as anything else." "Did you ever marry?" Sarah's expression turned wistful. "Once. Long time ago. He died in a mining accident when I was 23. I always thought I'd marry again, but it never happened. So I built this instead." She gestured to the boarding house. "Not what I planned, but it's mine. That counts for something." "It counts for a lot." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the town go about its business. Eliza thought about how much had changed since she'd first arrived, broken and desperate and convinced she'd made a terrible mistake. Now Forge Creek felt almost familiar. The rhythms of it made sense. The people were known quantities. It still wasn't home exactly, but it was close. Cole appeared at the end of the street, riding in from wherever he'd been. He spotted Eliza on the porch and raised a hand in greeting. She waved back. Sarah noticed and smiled. "You two are good for each other, you know." "You think so?" "I know so. He's less rigid than he used to be, and you're more solid, like you've found your footing." "I have, I think. Finally." "Good. This place needs people with footing. Too many just pass through." Eliza stood. "I should get back. Cole will want dinner." "Go on then, but come by again soon. I've got a new pie recipe I'm trying." "Is it going to be terrible, like all your other pies?" Sarah laughed. "Probably, but you'll eat it anyway because you're polite." "I will, and I'll hate every bite. That's the spirit." Eliza walked back through the muddy streets, dodging puddles and horse droppings, feeling lighter than she had in months. When she got home, Cole was already inside, cleaning his rifle at the table. "How was Sarah?" he asked without looking up. "Good. She's making another pie." "Of course she is." Cole set down the cleaning rod. "I've been thinking about something. Should I be worried?" "Probably." He almost smiled. The territorial governor's been making noise about organizing the law enforcement in this region, wants to create an official sheriff's office, proper deputies, that whole thing. "What does that mean for you?" "Means I'd have a title that's actually recognized. Means backup when I need it. Means more resources." Cole leaned back in his chair. "But it also means more oversight, more politics, more people telling me how to do my job. Sounds like you're not sure how you feel about it." "I'm not. That's why I'm talking to you about it." He met her eyes. "This would affect both of us. If I take the position, we'd have more stability, better pay, might even be able to get a bigger house, hire some help around here. But it would also mean I'm gone more, dealing with territorial business instead of just local problems." Eliza sat down across from him. "What do you want to do?" "I want your opinion first." The fact that he was asking meant everything. 6 months ago, he would have made the decision himself and informed her after. Now he was treating her like an actual partner. "I think you should do it," Eliza said. "Not because of the money or the house, but because you're good at this. You bring order to chaos. And if the territory needs that on a larger scale, you should be the one to do it. Even if it means more time apart, I can handle time apart. I've gotten pretty good at handling things on my own." Cole studied her face. "You have. Better than I expected." "Thanks, I think. It's a compliment. When you first got here, I didn't think you'd last a month. Now I can't imagine this place without you in it." The words hit her harder than he probably intended. Eliza felt her eyes start to burn and blinked hard. "That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me," she said. "Then I need to work on my compliments." They looked at each other across the table, and Eliza saw something in his expression that hadn't been there before. Something warm and unguarded. "Cole," she said carefully, "are we actually going to talk about this?" "About what?" "About the fact that this arrangement has turned into something more than either of us expected." He was quiet for a long moment. "I suppose it has." And I don't know what to do about it. I'm not good at this. At feelings and declarations and whatever else is supposed to happen. I'm not asking for declarations. I'm just asking if you feel it too. This, whatever this is." Cole set down the rifle and came around the table. He pulled out the chair next to her and sat, closer than he usually did. Close enough that she could see the small scar on his chin, the silver threading through his hair at the temples. "I feel it," he said quietly. "Have been for a while now, if I'm being honest. Longer than I wanted to admit." "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I didn't know if you felt the same. And because I didn't want to ruin what we'd built. This partnership, it works. I didn't want to complicate it." "It's already complicated, Cole. We're married. We live together. We've fought side by side. How much more complicated could it get?" "A lot, probably." He reached out and took her hand, his touch careful, almost tentative. "But maybe that's all right. Maybe complicated is better than simple." Eliza looked down at their joined hands. His was rough and scarred, hers smaller but calloused from months of hard work. They fit together better than she'd expected. "So what do we do now?" she asked. "I don't know. Figure it out as we go, same as everything else." Cole's thumb brushed across her knuckles. "But I know I don't want you to leave. Not now, not ever. And not just because we made a deal, because I want you here. I want to be here. Even though I'm difficult and closed off and terrible at expressing anything, especially because of that. You're honest, Cole. You don't pretend to be something you're not. After a lifetime of people who are all performance and no substance, that matters to me." He was quiet for a moment. Then he leaned in and kissed her, brief and careful, like he was afraid she might pull away. She didn't. When he pulled back, his expression was uncertain. "Was that all right?" "More than all right." "Good. Because I've been wanting to do that for weeks, and I didn't know if..." Eliza kissed him again, cutting off whatever he was about to say. This time it lasted longer, and when they finally broke apart, they were both breathing harder. "We're really doing this," Cole said. It wasn't a question. "We really are. It's probably going to be a disaster." "Probably," Eliza agreed. "But at least it'll be our disaster." Cole laughed, the sound surprising them both. Then he pulled her close, and they sat there in the fading light, holding each other like they were the only solid things in an uncertain world. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy, but it was real. And that was enough. The years that followed weren't simple, but they were good. Cole took the position as territorial sheriff, which meant longer trips and more responsibility, but also meant Forge Creek became an official hub of law enforcement. The town grew slowly but steadily. New buildings appeared. More families settled in the area. The wild edge started to smooth just a little. Eliza found her place in the growing community. She started teaching reading and writing to the children, using the small church building when it wasn't in use. She helped Sarah expand the boarding house, managing the books and correspondence. She became the person people went to when they needed someone organized and practical and unafraid to speak their mind. Agnes eventually admitted, after a few glasses of whiskey one Christmas, that she'd been wrong about Eliza. "Thought you were soft," she said, words slurring slightly. "Thought you'd break. But you're tougher than half the men in this town." "Thanks, Agnes. That almost sounded like a compliment." It was a compliment, you stubborn woman. Take it. Eliza took it. She and Cole grew into their partnership the way plants grow toward light, slowly, naturally, with setbacks and struggles, but always moving forward. They learned each other's rhythms, each other's needs. They fought sometimes, heated arguments about decisions and priorities and the 100 small things that people who live together fight about. But they also learned how to fight fair, how to apologize, how to compromise without either of them feeling diminished. They built a life together that was theirs and no one else's. 3 years after Eliza first arrived in Forge Creek, they built a new house on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, but bigger than the old place, with real windows and a separate bedroom and a porch that faced west to catch the sunset. Cole built most of it himself, with Eliza helping where she could. It took them 4 months, working around his schedule and the weather, but when it was done, it felt like an accomplishment that belonged to both of them. The night they moved in, they sat on that new porch and watched the sun go down, painting the sky in shades of orange and red and purple. "You ever regret it?" Cole asked. "Staying." "Not once. You?" "Not once." He took her hand. "Though I regret it took me so long to see what was right in front of me. We both needed time. To grow into this, into each other. Maybe, but I wish I'd been smarter about it sooner." Eliza squeezed his hand. "We got here eventually. That's what matters." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the day fade. Somewhere in town, a dog barked. Somewhere else, a child laughed. The sounds of a community settling in for the night, familiar and ordinary and precious. 5 years in, Eliza gave birth to their first child, a daughter they named Catherine after Cole's mother. The birth was hard, attended by Sarah and the doctor who'd finally settled in Forge Creek, and there were moments when Eliza thought she might not survive it. But she did, and when Sarah placed the squalling, red-faced infant in her arms, Eliza felt something shift in her chest. This tiny person was hers, theirs. A life they'd created together, built on the foundation of everything they'd survived. Cole was terrified of the baby at first, holding her like she might shatter at any moment. But he learned, the way he learned everything, with focus and determination and a surprising gentleness that made Eliza fall in love with him all over again. Watching him rock Catherine to sleep, humming tunelessly while her tiny hand wrapped around his finger, Eliza realized something important. They hadn't just survived. They'd built something lasting. A son came 2 years later, Thomas, named for Eliza's father despite everything. She'd made her peace with her father's choices by then, understood that he'd been desperate and flawed and doing the best he could with limited options. Naming their son after him felt like forgiveness, like closing a circle that had been open too long. The children grew up wild and free, the way frontier children did. Catherine was fierce and stubborn, her mother's daughter in every way. Thomas was quieter, thoughtful, with his father's steady focus. They learned to ride before they could properly walk, learned to shoot by the time they were 10, learned that the world was big and dangerous and beautiful all at once. Eliza taught them reading and arithmetic. Cole taught them honor and responsibility and the importance of keeping your word. Together, they taught them that strength came in many forms, and that survival was important, but so was choosing what you survived for. The town kept growing. By the time Catherine was 12, Forge Creek had a proper school, a bank, and 3 churches. The frontier edge had blunted, though it never disappeared entirely. There were still dangers, still problems that required Cole's particular skills, but the chaos had organized itself into something resembling civilization. Cole's reputation spread beyond the territory. He became known as the sheriff, who'd cleaned up the Dakota region, who'd brought law to a lawless place through a combination of violence when necessary and restraint when possible. Governors consulted him. Other lawmen came to learn from him. He was offered positions in bigger towns, better pay, more prestige. He turned them all down. "Why would I leave?" he said when Eliza asked about it. "Everything I care about is here." She understood the feeling completely. On their 10th anniversary, Cole took Eliza back to the place where the stagecoach had wrecked. It took some searching to find it. The landscape had changed, grass covering the ruts and scars. But they found it eventually, marked now only by a pile of weathered wood and the memory of what had happened there. "This is where it all started," Cole said. "Where I found you. Where you saved me." "I think maybe you saved yourself. I just happened to be there." Eliza looked around at the empty prairie, thinking about the terrified woman she'd been that day, broken and desperate and certain she'd made the worst decision of her life. "I was so scared," she said, "of everything, of dying, of living, of what came next. I couldn't see any way forward that didn't end badly." "What changed?" "I did. You did. We both changed into people who could actually build something together." Eliza turned to face him. "That woman who crawled out of this wreck? She's gone. I'm not her anymore." "Who are you now?" "I'm Eliza Maddox, wife, mother, teacher, partner to a stubborn lawman who took too long to admit he loved me." Cole smiled. "I did love you pretty early on, you know. I was just too much of a coward to say it." "When?" "Hard to say exactly. Maybe when you pulled that gun on those 3 drunks and didn't flinch. Maybe before that, when you agreed to come after Garrett, even though you had no idea what you were getting into. Or maybe it was later when you chose to stay even though you had the means to leave." He pulled her close. "Point is, I loved you long before I was smart enough to say it out loud." "I love you too. Have for years now." "I know. You've been remarkably patient about waiting for me to catch up." "That's because I'm smarter than you." Cole laughed and kissed her. There in the middle of nowhere, in the place where both their old lives had ended and their new one had begun. When they finally pulled apart, Eliza looked out at the horizon, endless and blue and full of possibility. "We should get back," she said. "Sarah's watching the kids, and you know how Catherine gets when we're gone too long." "One more minute," Cole said. "I want to remember this." "Remember what?" "Everything. How far we've come, how different it all turned out than either of us expected." He held her hand, his thumb tracing familiar patterns across her knuckles. "We were supposed to be a transaction, Eliza, a business arrangement, nothing more. And instead we built a life, a real one, with love and family and purpose. We took something that should have been cold and necessary and turned it into something worth having." Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. "You're being sentimental." "I know, terrible habit. You're a bad influence." "The worst." They stood there a while longer, holding hands in the place where it all began, before finally mounting their horses and riding back toward Forge Creek, toward home, toward the life they'd built together from nothing but stubbornness and survival and eventually love. 20 years after Eliza first arrived in the territory, she stood on the porch of their house and watched the sunset, the way she did most evenings. Cole was inside, helping Thomas with some paperwork related to the ranch they'd acquired a few years back. Catherine was in town, teaching at the school Eliza had started years ago, carrying on the work in her own fierce, competent way. The town had grown into something substantial, not quite a city, but getting there. Streets were paved now. There was electricity in some buildings. The rough edges had smoothed almost completely, though every now and then something would happen to remind everyone that the frontier wasn't entirely tamed. But mostly, it was peaceful, ordinary. The kind of place where people raised families and built businesses and lived quiet lives that didn't make it into history books. Eliza thought about the girl she'd been, climbing onto that doomed stagecoach in Boston, young and scared and convinced her life was ending. She thought about all the versions of herself she'd been since, the desperate woman who'd agreed to marry a stranger, the fighter who'd pulled a trigger to save her own life, the partner who'd chosen to stay when she could have left, the mother who'd raised children to be strong and kind, the teacher who'd helped build something lasting. She'd lived a dozen lives in one lifetime, each one built on the foundation of the one before. Cole came out and joined her on the porch, settling into the chair beside hers with the groan of a man whose body had absorbed years of hard use. "Kids are exhausting," he said. "They're adults, Cole, with children of their own. Still exhausting." He reached for her hand, the gesture as natural now as breathing. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything. Nothing. How strange life turns out." "Strange good or strange bad?" "Strange good. I was sold to settle a debt. That's how this started. I should have hated it. Should have spent every day wishing I was somewhere else." "But you didn't." "No, because somewhere along the way, I realized something important." Eliza turned to look at him, this man who'd been stranger, husband, partner, and finally true companion. "I was never really sold. I was forged. Every hard thing, every impossible choice, every moment I thought I couldn't survive, it all shaped me into someone stronger than I'd ever been. Someone real." You were always real, Eliza. No. In Boston, I was decorative. Here, I became substantial, and you helped me do that, even when you didn't know that's what you were doing. Cole was quiet for a moment. You did the same for me, you know. I was just going through the motions before you showed up. Enforcing the law, keeping order, but not really living. You taught me there was more to life than just survival. That partnership meant something. That love was worth the risk. Took you long enough to figure it out. I'm a slow learner. You knew that when you married me. Eliza laughed, the sound carrying across the porch and out into the gathering dusk. Somewhere in town, a bell rang. Somewhere else, children played, their voices high and bright. The sounds of life continuing, generation after generation, built on the choices of people who'd come before. Do you think it was worth it? Cole asked. Everything you gave up? Everything you went through? Eliza didn't even have to think about it. Every second, every struggle, every moment of fear and doubt and pain, it was all worth it because it led here. To this life, this family, this everything. No regrets? Not one. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun finished its descent, painting the sky in colors that had no names. In a few minutes, they'd go inside. Cole would check the locks, the old habit never dying even though the danger had long since passed. Eliza would make tea, and they'd sit at the kitchen table talking about nothing important, enjoying the simple pleasure of each other's company. In the morning, they'd wake and do it all again. The ordinary rhythms of a life well lived. But for now, they watched the day end, holding hands in the twilight. Eliza thought about her father, about the debt that had brought her here. She thought about the lawyer who'd presented her with impossible choices. She thought about the stagecoach and the bandits and Cole appearing like something out of a story, offering her survival if nothing else. She thought about all the moments she could have given up, could have run, could have chosen the easy path instead of the hard one. But she hadn't. She'd chosen to stay, to fight, to build. And in choosing, she'd defined her own freedom. That was the truth of it, she realized. Freedom wasn't about escape or comfort or safety. It was about agency, about making choices and living with their consequences, about building a life that was yours, even when the foundation was laid by someone else's debts. Her father had set events in motion, but Eliza had decided what they became. She'd been offered a cage, and she'd chosen to stay in it, to make it hers, to transform it into something that felt like home. That wasn't weakness. That was power. Cole squeezed her hand, pulling her back to the present. Getting philosophical in your old age? He asked. Maybe. Or maybe just finally understanding what all this meant. And what did it mean? Eliza smiled. That I was never sold. I was forged. And in choosing to stay, I didn't lose my freedom. I defined it. Cole nodded slowly. I like that. It's better than my version. What was your version? That we were both too stubborn to quit, and stubbornness sometimes looks like love if you squint at it right. Eliza laughed again, bright and genuine. That's terrible. I know. That's why you're the teacher and I'm the lawman. They stood, joints protesting after sitting still too long, and walked inside together. The house welcomed them with familiar smells and comfortable disorder. Books piled on tables, Catherine's latest letter from the university where her daughter was studying law, Thomas's sketches for expanding the ranch scattered across the desk. Evidence of lives being lived, choices being made, futures being built. Eliza made tea while Cole stoked the fire. They moved around each other with the practiced ease of people who'd spent decades learning each other's rhythms. When the tea was ready, they sat at the kitchen table, the same way they'd sat at that first table in Cole's small house 20 years ago. So much had changed. So much had stayed the same. What do you think happens next? Eliza asked. For us? Or for them? Cole gestured vaguely toward town, toward the future where their children and grandchildren would carry on. Both. For them, I think things keep growing, changing, getting more civilized and probably more complicated. The world's not going to stay wild forever. Cole sipped his tea. For us? I think we keep doing what we've always done, living our lives, supporting each other, watching the sunset and drinking tea and being grateful we made it this far. That sounds nice. It is nice. It's not grand or exciting or the kind of thing people write stories about, but it's ours. That's enough. Eliza reached across the table and took his hand. More than enough. They finished their tea in companionable silence, then went to bed, lying side by side in the darkness. Through the window, Eliza could see stars appearing one by one, constant and distant and beautiful. She thought about this journey that had brought her here, the fear, the pain, the impossible choices, the moment she'd decided to stay instead of run, the slow, difficult process of building trust and partnership and, eventually, love. It hadn't been easy, it hadn't been perfect, but it had been real. And she wouldn't trade it for anything. Cole's breathing evened out into sleep, but Eliza stayed awake a while longer, thinking about everything they'd built. About the legacy they were leaving, not in land or money or position, but in the example they'd set. That strength came in many forms. That love could grow in the most unlikely soil. That choosing to stay, to fight, to build something real was its own kind of freedom. Their story wasn't over yet. There would be more years, more challenges, more moments of joy and sorrow and ordinary living. But the foundation was solid. The partnership was real. Whatever came next, they'd face it together, just like they'd faced everything else. Eliza closed her eyes and let sleep take her, secure in the knowledge that she was exactly where she was meant to be. She'd been offered a cage built from her father's debts, and she'd chosen to stay, to transform it, to make it hers. In that choice, she'd found something more valuable than escape. She'd found herself. And that, in the end, was the only freedom that truly mattered.